Today I want to talk about bike saddles, what's true and false in the world of saddle advertising, and how could this 13-year-old prototype still be my favorite seat for tri-bike builds. Today we're going to take a brief look at the history of bike saddles in time trial and triathlon, including some important ins and outs of the physiology and fit philosophy that makes such a difference in determining which saddle might be right for you. Hey everybody, Nick here, and today's video again is a brief history of saddles in time trial and triathlon. And I should probably say here that when I say brief, I also mean selective. I'm picking certain things that I think of as landmarks over that history of the sport, and I'm not necessarily going to show you every single saddle that was ever made, or even every saddle that you might think is important, but certain things that I think of as milestones or landmarks along the way. And of course, we need to start with traditional road saddles. Looking right here, this is a Sala San Marco Concours saddle. They also made another similar one called the Rolls, which had this sort of very, almost like a horse saddle shape. This was popular with a lot of riders. Famously, Lance Armstrong used this on all of his bikes, whether they were TT bikes or road bikes. And you know, like most road saddles, it's going to have a pointed nose and a wider rear. And generally, when you sit upright, your sit bones are going to be, towards the middle or 2/3 of the way back on the saddle. The fleshier part of your glutes can rest on the wider part of the saddle. And then the nose is kind of used by your thighs for additional control or a point of contact. But hopefully you're not pressing your body against that nose, because of course that would be very uncomfortable. But as we rotate forward and get lower into the time trial and triathlon position, the place where your body contacts the saddle changes quite a bit. Now, in that earlier, maybe Lance Armstrong era, fit philosophies were quite a bit different. Seeing a 76 or even 74-degree seat tube angle on even a time trial bike was relatively common. And so they were really just riding road positions with their hips in a road position type of spot and just trying to fold their hips over like sardine cans. Not great in terms of production of power or breathing, but that was sort of the philosophy back then. But as we learned, no, we really should be pushing that seat forward so that you can rotate your hips, get further forward, but still maintain a more open hip angle. Bikes started to change, the design of frames started to change, and saddles eventually needed to change. Because if you are so forward like that, now all of your tender flesh, in the perineum and all of your sensitive bits are just pressing against the nose of that saddle. Not great. For time trialists that maybe they only have to ride a very short amount of time, and maybe they're very, very lightweight riders, and maybe they're producing a lot of power, and so they're not really contacting the saddle all that much anyway, because most of their support is on their arms and their feet, saddle selection maybe not as important. But if your sport is triathlon, and you are spending hours and hours and hours on that bike, and maybe you're a little heavier than a Tour de France rider, and maybe you don't produce quite as much power, and certainly not riding just for 4 minutes, now those contact points become really, really, really important. And there were all kinds of different saddles that people liked to use. Traditional road saddles like this one, if they had a cutout, might have been more comfortable for some, but it was always considered this sort of dark art of which saddle is going to work for you. We never know. It's just a huge mystery. And then in the late 1990s, a couple gentlemen named Steve Toll and John Cobb founded a company called ISM, which stands for Ideal Seat Modification. And they produced this Adamo saddle. The idea behind the Adamo is that rather than having a rear part and then a nose, we're going to basically chop off what you might think of as the nose, and then that rear part of the saddle where your sit bones actually sit, that's going to be the front of the saddle. And so that's exactly what the Adamo looks like. It has a twin nose or a split nose, or what's sometimes even called a noseless design, such that your ischial tuberosities rest on those blades at the front. This was a wild departure from every saddle that had existed before, for the most part, and it was a bit disruptive, and people didn't quite understand the fit philosophy of the saddle. And the idea is we want to support your sit bones at the width that is correct for your particular sit bones. And when you sit up, Maybe the rear has a little bit more surface area to accommodate your glutes, your butt, have a little bit more support in an upright position, but that really what we're worried about is supporting your sit bones in most positions, whether you're really, really aggressive or mildly aggressive or upright. But this was really difficult for the road cyclists to accept. It's a wildly different looking saddle. People generally have a hard time with change or something that's not traditional, and that's especially true in the world of road cycling. This kind of funky looking thing with the two prongs sticking out, it was not cool. You were definitely not cool if you rolled up to your local ride with one of these saddles. And different brands tried doing different things to try and emulate this because the success of the Adamo was really difficult to ignore. Profile Design had a saddle called the Tri-Strike, I think, which was very narrow but had sort of like a channel thing. It was popular with some riders. I know Tim DeBoom really loved that saddle. Sala SMP came out with this kind of idea, which never appealed to me, but basically the nose droops down so that it's not in your way anymore. I don't know if maybe they like it because maybe you still get a little bit of contact with your thigh and so you can control the bike in that way, but I always thought that this was a much worse joke waiting to happen versus anything that you would see with an ISM seat. But slowly but surely, that idea of supporting your ischial tuberosities and designing saddles for the width and physiology of riders in that way reverberated throughout cycling, whether it was road cycling, gravel, triathlon, time trial. Every discipline has now benefited from this idea that the nose of the saddle is not the thing that's critical to your control. It's really how it matches the internal physiology of your hips and those sit bones. And so if we look at some saddles today, I went looking for overhead pictures of saddles so that I could compare them. And without even trying to find similar saddles, I came up with this. These are completely different brands meant for all kinds of different disciplines. I think they're mostly sort of aimed at time trial and triathlon, but this is the Prologo Time Trial Predator, the Wove V8, an Ergon saddle, a Sala Italia, Bi-saddle, and Physique. And you can see that the profiles looking down are just amazingly similar, right? And they definitely conform to this idea that we want to support you at your sit bones, and you can kind of self-select for the exact width that's right for you. But I guess as the rider, the question is, how do you know? I guess we're still sort of in that dark place of you have to sort of find your saddle and figure out which one's right for you. That sort of brings me back to this Dash prototype. So this is one of their earliest iterations of their triathlon saddles. They still make saddles like this today, although you can see that this one flares out pretty quickly, and their saddles today are a little bit more in line with what you see in this picture, where they start a little narrower and it's a little more linear before flaring out, kind of like the ones in the image. But this one just happened to fit me really well. I generally only ride on, the front little third or half of the saddle anyway, even if I'm upright. And so this rear part isn't really doing much, but this happens to match sort of my physiology really well. And so I still love this saddle. It weighs nothing. It's 79 grams, which is lighter than almost anything you can buy anywhere. And it still has some padding, right? It's not going to be like a big 3D mesh or anything, but this is comfortable. I still put this on bikes today and I love it. But the question for riders today is, okay, well, let's say I buy into this idea of what's most important is supporting my sit bones, and the nose of the saddle isn't that critical, forward of my sit bones. How do I know what width is right for me? And the sad answer is that it is still a bit of a dark art in that way, in that it's sort of trial and error. You could try to sort of measure something, but it's never going to be very accurate, right? Like a measurement of your actual sit bones still doesn't take into account your flexibility, the mass of your musculature, the flexibility of your tendons, how big your glutes are, how much fat you have, etc. And so it's still just a case of trial and error. Bi-saddle is very interesting because they're the only company making something with this kind of fit philosophy that is adjustable so far. I think it's really interesting. I think the concept of an adjustable saddle in the triathlon and time trial space has a lot of merit. I haven't always agreed with exactly how they've implemented it, but I'm familiar with their founder, and he's a cool guy, and I think he's interested in making things that really work for people. So I have zero bad things to say about any of the saddles on this page. They're all beautiful, and they all conform to how we understand bike fit and fit philosophy today. But I just think it's so interesting to look at this, and I think it's important to tell people why saddles look like this today versus how they looked 30 years ago. And I think the change is universally good. This isn't the case like what I said with frames a few weeks ago. Like, manufacturers are starting to make TT bikes with slacker seat angles again, and it's like a step backwards into the past for bad reasons. These changes are very good. I would be happy to use any of the saddles on this page today, and I think I could find a comfortable position with just about any of them. But let me know what you think. Are you happy with the changes that we've seen today? What are your thoughts on the landscape of time trial and triathlon saddles? And of course, go ahead and light me up in the comments that I didn't mention your favorite saddle. But that's going to be all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.